Shannan, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. This is the first time for us to meet and kind of a first time for me to be introduced to your work through your newest book, Start with Hello. So I just want
Yay.
to thank you. I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing and the beautiful words and God's truth that you're putting out there. You are just a spectacular human being.
Mm.
And I am so pumped to share you with my community today.
Oh, thank you for having me on, Christine. I cannot wait to chat.
Well, we're going to be talking mostly about your newest book. Like I said, Start with Hello. But before we kind of dig into the book, I wanted just to maybe borrow your wisdom for a minute because
Okay.
a
I can't
lot,
wait.
yeah, well, I'm going to come at you kind of like help me first and then, okay? So a
Great.
lot of my listeners know I just moved to a new town. It's a smaller town. I was in Austin, just outside of Austin, just moved to a smaller little town in the middle of the Texas Hill Country.
Yeah.
I love it here, but here I am, mid 40s, and
Hmm.
I am trying to figure out how to be the new kid in
Oh,
town,
yeah.
how to find friends. And some of your book addresses that, you have addressed that in other places. So could you speak to that and help me a little bit?
I can. I mean, yes, absolutely. Start with hello is hopefully helpful to you in some of those areas, and we'll talk more about that. But, I can say as soon as you said like being the new kid, my mind immediately went back to 10 years ago when me and my family moved into this neighborhood. I knew no one.
Okay.
And, I was in a different phase of life. I had a bunch of, three little tiny kids, preschoolers and kindergartners. And, that was the phase of life I was in. But I realized pretty quickly, as we all do, whether we're new in a place or we've been there for a while, like we need community around us. We need connection. And we are all a little lonely.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where we fall on that spectrum, I think we are all a little lonely. So my suggestion to you is that you be looking for other people who just simply might also be a little lonely. That is how I came to find some of my dearest and closest friends, because I wasn't looking for, somebody who was similar to me. I wasn't looking for someone who had things in common with me. I It was like none of that mattered. I just need people. Like I need somebody
Mm.
with a pulse to be near me, to be my friend. And so because I just kind of had that lens for like who else, are there other new people? Are there other people around who just like I get that feeling that they might be a little lonely, that they became some of my greatest and dearest friends. And on paper, I had very little in common with them. So my suggestion is to just kind of, put those lists, those checklists aside, and that idea of like find our people. I would say we need to just recognize our people. They're right.
Mm.
They're around us. They're already in the same world we're in, at the same place at the same time. And it's worth discovering why that matters and why that's meaningful. So yeah, I mean it's a little bit of putting yourself out there and going out of your comfort zone just a little bit. We don't
Mm.
have to jump in with both feet, but just kind of being aware of who's around us and available when we find those little tiny opportunities to connect.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's so good. And you're right. We are all to some degree
Yeah.
lonely.
Yeah.
It is endemic in culture
Yep.
right now. And it is really hard. Are you an extrovert or an introvert?
I'm an introvert, big
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay. So you get it.
Yeah.
You
I
get the
do.
tension of,
Yeah.
that it's a little bit, it's one, scary to be the new kid, two, it's awkward,
Yeah.
at 45 to go and make new friends. We're not
Yeah.
in on the playground as kids anymore,
Right. Right.
automatically thrown into life together.
Exactly.
And maybe we are wired. God bless the extroverts out there that are just so ready to go out and start a conversation with
Yes.
virtually anyone. Some of us like people, but then we need to come home and rock in fetal position after we've been with
Right.
them. And so that's a
Right.
balance, right?
Well, and some of us, I think introverts, myself in particular, I have to just put a little more intention behind it. Like
Yeah.
my natural motivation is not going to be like to go out and, meet new people and, like that is not at all how I'm wired.
Okay.
So I have to be just a little more intentional. I have to remind myself often, like, I need connection, I want connection. And in order to get to that, I do have to just nudge myself out of my comfort zone. I think for some people, it's like right inside their comfort zone. For me, it's not.
Yeah.
But I've learned, while I don't think for me it will ever be easy, it gets easier because I know what's waiting on the other side of doing that thing that feels kind of hard. On the other side of that is connection.
And I loved in your book, you talked about like being like surrendering to the discomfort
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
comes with community,
Yes.
that it guarantees us that we will be seen
Yeah.
and known, and it doesn't necessarily guarantee like comfort.
Right. For
You know,
sure.
yeah. And but it'd be one thing, like sometimes I think when people are like community, to be honest with you, my theology on community was wrong for a long time.
Yeah.
I held to my introversion kind of like as a super special, precious pet that meant that I didn't have to go out in the real
Right.
world. And that because Jesus and I were real close, I really didn't need other people.
Right. Me
Now, to
too.
be fair, other people had not been safe for me. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's
Right.
that. And we need
Right.
to honor that. At the same time, community is not a preference.
Right.
Community is, we're hardwired for it.
We
God
are.
intended it this way. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons we're also lonely and sad and dealing with a lot of things is because we have not been obeying God in this particular area. That's the end of
Yeah.
my sermon on that
I
particular
love
thing.
it.
I have
I
feelings
I
about it.
yes, I resonate with those feelings because I think I too, like, introverts can feel like, well, God didn't make me that way, so I'm
Yeah.
off the hook. And we're just not. We're not off the hook. We've got to find different ways to get ourselves there,
Yeah.
because I just believe with my whole heart, neighbor is part of our spiritual DNA. It is how
Yes.
we were created. We were made to know each other and to need each other.
This wasn't always your jam. Like
Yeah.
you've learned all of this, like your theology has evolved
Oh
on what
man.
it means to neighbor well. Could you share some of that with us?
Yeah. My husband and I didn't grow up in the same area, but our childhoods were very similar, like Midwestern evangelical backgrounds.
Okay.
Church was always a part of my life. And I write about this in Start with Hello and even my previous books, but a lot of that, I draw back to my childhood for what community could look like, which is to
Mm.
say, like, my parents and their community was really kind of centralized around church in a way that, like you said, my faith has evolved in a lot of ways, but they were getting some things right in terms
Mhm.
of like what it looks like to just really live ordinary rhythms together with people around them. And
Mhm.
that's a beautiful thing that I found myself wanting to recapture that in some ways. But yeah, coming into adulthood, it's like you kind of start to realize that these verses, for example, in the Bible, love God, love your neighbor, like that's kind of a refrain throughout scripture that I was certainly familiar with,
Mhm.
but I had never really stopped to examine what it actually meant and why it mattered and who is my neighbor. And so when my family moved, particularly 10 years ago, into this neighborhood where we live now, and suddenly, I went from living in rural contexts where, I was kind of surrounded by soybean fields or whatever, to living in this much more complicated, bustling place with people all around me. I had to really contend with those questions.
Mm.
It mattered in a way it hadn't mattered before. And I started to realize that for so much of my life, I had almost kind of given myself an out, like, okay, God, I don't hate my neighbor. Does that count?
Mm.
Like,
Ah.
does not hating my neighbor count as loving my neighbor? and
Mhm.
and that's really how I kind of saw it. Like, of course, I don't really know my neighbor, but I
Mhm.
certainly don't hate them. And so at the point that I found myself with next door neighbors right up on top of us, the idea of what does it look like to live together in community, and what does it look like to know the people closest to us, and what does it look like to live as a neighbor? I mean, I drew heavily on the story of the Good Samaritan
Mhm.
from Luke, and this idea that, our neighbor is one who draws near in mercy.
Yeah.
That's what a neighbor is, and that's what it looks like to live as a neighbor, whether we are people of, a Christian faith. I really wanted Start with Hello to be applicable to different people from different places. I wanted to just kind of find that some of these baseline, like, what does this really mean and what does it look like? Drawing near to each other in mercy transcends some of the things that might define us as different in some way. But that's the definition that I really hold to now. And that means it's it works both directions. Like,
Hmm.
when we're living together as neighbors, it means we are taking turns being the one in need and being the one offering aid. And it's a constant back and forth of ask for what you need, offer what you can, and we just take turns forever.
I love that. So we've talked about intentionality. You're talking now about like embracing a certain level of vulnerability
Yeah.
that being okay. Like sometimes I think like love our neighbor. Sometimes I think I really should have fleshed this out before I try to come at you. So just,
I can't wait.
yeah. But sometimes I think like in Christian cultures, sometimes we think of like loving our neighbor as ministry, like, but there's a
Yeah.
hierarchy to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yep.
what you're talking about is this side by side,
Yeah.
this withness,
Yep.
that we're not ministering to, we are doing life with, you're
Yeah.
evening the playing field.
Yeah.
And you're
That's
saying,
it.
what does it mean? And this whole thing about like mercy, okay, and that it's
Mhm.
reciprocated,
Yeah.
right? So there's mutuality here. You're talking
Yeah.
about intentionality here, authenticity, right? Because we have to tell the truth. We have
Yeah.
to live in truth if we're going to be
That's it.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
What else? Because
Yeah.
one thing that is different, I'm guessing. So I'm in Texas, so I'm picturing a rural thing, and then you moved to a more dense. So you probably went from a lack of diversity to a lot more diversity.
100%. Yes.
Okay. So what
Yeah.
was that like for you?
We moved not far in terms of distance and proximity. That's
Okay.
something because I all three of my books have been written about these themes and ideas. They have kind of that through line. But people sometimes walk away with the thought that like I moved, states away, I moved to a whole different place. And they come to that understanding because while we didn't move far, it really was a different world in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's remarkable to me because it shows that you can move 20 minutes up the road and find yourself in just a brand new social location where everything is different.
Yeah.
It's also noteworthy for me to point out, Corey, my husband and I, we are white parents of four non-white kids. So all of our kids came into our family through adoption. And so this idea of landing in a space and in a neighborhood that was much more diverse has been one of the great gifts and blessings of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think we fully appreciated or understood, unfortunately, how important that was going to be. And so I thank God for that. I thank God that we landed in a place where our kids were going to just simply blend in a
Mm-hmm.
different way. And that
Mm-hmm.
has been transformational for all of our lives. But, we very much did come from a place that was kind of like being in a bubble. We didn't even know it, but
Yeah.
everybody around us, for the most part, from childhood on up to this move, looked and lived and believed like we did.
Right.
And to find yourself in a place where there's so much difference and there are so many layers of difference,
Mm-hmm.
I had to understand a couple different things. Number one, what you said, Christine, is true. We had some baggage around this idea of ministry,
Mm-hmm.
that and the neighborhood we landed in is a low income, under resourced. I mean, I think it's amply resourced, but it would be considered under resourced
Okay.
neighborhood. And so we had some of this, you know, kind of some of the residue of this idea of like helping
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
around us. So I had to come to understand the deep significance and power of receiving from the people around me and not framing myself as the one who would always be giving or helping or whatever the case may be. So
Mm-hmm.
learning to receive was honestly just a game changer. And then beyond that, I started to understand that I was given the gift, I was allowed to be curious. I was simply allowed to be curious about the people and the lives around me. I didn't have to feel threatened by our differences. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to feel afraid of our differences. I
Mm-hmm.
could just get to know the people around me as humans, as neighbors, as, people on the same place, the same patch of earth at the same time, and just let myself be curious. And I think that was something that I had not been taught. I had been taught, maybe subconsciously or subliminally, I don't know, but this idea that difference was in some way dangerous, and we should kind of keep some distance
Yeah.
between ourselves. And what I continue to learn in this place is the opposite is actually true. Like, we need to shorten that distance and just sit with each other and listen better, and let ourselves be curious about the things that we feel make us different.
What's another practical tip or two about engaging with folks who are different than us and hold different
Yeah.
viewpoints? How do we do that well?
Well, I think of a couple neighbors in particular who, this is the day we are in, is that we wear our heart on our sleeves in new ways. And one of those ways is we put flags on our houses, and flags and,
Yeah.
signs in our yard. And so suddenly it's like we're identifying people in a different way, and in a way that is really polarizing. And
Mhm.
I put myself in that camp because I've had signs in my yard that other
Mhm.
people have probably felt like, oh no. I think of a neighbor in particular who, they put up their flag and I put up my sign in the yard. And so it might have felt like this is a difference too big for us to overcome or to
Mhm.
navigate. And all I can say about that is they have eaten at my table. They have been, it's right there behind me. I'm
Mhm.
sitting here in my dining room. They have sat at that table, and I know that that makes a difference. And I'm not saying that that makes me any better than them. I'm simply saying we have all made the decision to come near to each other without agenda. I think we just have to find ways to cut through some of the noise. I mean, I'm not going to be the one to say, like, don't put the sign in your yard, because these things are really important to some of us,
Yeah.
and it goes both ways. So it's like, how do we coexist together in spite of these loud differences? We eat together whenever we can.
Mhm.
We drop muffins off when we've baked extra and just
Mhm.
say, these are for you. Do you want them? We reach out and ask for help when we need help. And those are the things that hold us together and sustain us through these differences that can feel so scary and so intimidating even. We've got to be discerning. We've got to be discerning. But I there are times when even differences that feel big don't have to be the thing that kind of crowds everything else out. That's all I'm saying.
Very nice. Yes. So practice discernment, but don't participate in the division.
Yeah. I mean, just find ways to be human together. There are times to be kind of, I love politics. I love following the news. I think it's an important part of being a neighbor, is being engaged and finding ways to be with the people who have the least amount of power in certain situations. Like, these are central to who I am and what I value in the world.
Mhm.
But there's also a time to just say, hey, neighbors, do you want to come over for soup? And we can set some of those things aside and just eat together. And that those are the times when we're able, when it's the right thing, when we can do that. Those are the things that build that resilience that we need to just continue to coexist together in a way that is merciful and compassionate and empathetic.
Very nice. Okay. So empathy, hospitality, curiosity.
Yeah.
Those would be some good starting places
Yeah.
for making friends and neighboring well.
Yep.